together. So we have a staff meeting, a stand-up huddle on Monday mornings, and we always have breakfast. But it's a rotating breakfast, so we'll have fruit sometimes, but 1 week a month, we bring in Chick-fil-A. And I can correlate the attendance of our staff meeting with when we have Chick-fil-A, so we're glad you had a great lunch. Our staff appreciates that. Our staff here at the CRC really certainly appreciate all of you. I'm gonna take a minute for a commercial first and say, I am Brett Malone. I'm the president of the CRC. We are so thankful to have you here. Welcome. This is your house. This is your week. We put this on for you. And this is a week-long celebration of all of the innovation that goes on, whether it's here in the park, here in Montgomery County, here in Virginia, or here on this planet. You are welcome here because this is an opportunity for us all to bring these ideas together and try to advance our agenda, whether it's innovation, whether you're doing a startup company and you're looking for capital, whether you're part of a big, huge company and you're looking for new ideas, or whether you're part of a university and you're trying to like bring your technologies off of the bench, out of the lab, into the marketplace. So that's why we exist here at the CRC. This is your home to do any and all of that. And this week is an opportunity for you to see what goes on inside the park. So if you're new to the park and you're curious about what goes on, grab someone like Laura, grab anyone with a shirt. Sarah here is rocking one of our Game Changer shirts. We've got a couple versions of it. Grab anyone wearing one of these shirts and say, hey, what's the CRC all about? So if you're not sure what it means to be here, ask someone, get involved, get plugged in. Okay, enough for the commercial, thanks. So we're here to talk about energy. We've already had some great talks. Thank you all for walking us through each segment. Today, I think this is going to be a good conversation. So we all here, we at the CRC we've gotten involved in understanding the importance of energy technology for global solutions. Obviously, global sustainability is key. With global warming, with all of the new technologies that are in demand, there's more and more pressure on innovation, conversion, and sustainability, frankly. So Braden did a great job of talking about the overlap of demand and clean energy. And so we see this tension between, we need more supply. We don't care what color it is. We don't care how clean it is. We just need more supply because we're growing as a planet. And then, big corporate, drivers of global stewardship, we'll call it, they have very aggressive sustainability goals. We want to be carbon neutral by 2035, by 2050. So this tension arises, and what we all collectively find ourselves in is a position of having technology leadership, innovation leadership to help bring some of those solutions to these companies and to these leaders. So I'm going to let our panel introduce themselves. Some of you already have seen the presentations. Braden here from Virginia, from Dominion Energy Innovation Center. We're certainly happy to have him. Phil from E1 Air and Nexa Capital. So representing the opportunity to bring money together with technology to bring new technologies to the market. Near and dear, talking about hydrogen. And then obviously Ken looking at it from a perspective of, global transportation infrastructure, space, and overall technologies to help us continue to advance what we want to do. So, I think the big thing to frame this, I'll let you open this up, but maybe a word or two on your background and most importantly, this concept of net zero and there's tensions. I'm going to walk through a couple of questions because we're all in the trenches trying to deliver on this. And what's interesting and, where the real work exists is where the tension points are, whether it's cost, technology readiness, communication and understanding of what the solution looks like. So, Braden, I'll let you kick it off and maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're seeing at these tension and intersection points.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brett. I'm honored to be here. Familiar faces from before in the day when I was presenting and new ones. So I do have to open up with my full disclaimer. I am not the utility company, even though you're in APCO territory, but we're actually a public-private partnership between Dominion Energy and then a couple of municipalities and a state agency in Virginia to really advance and move forward our energy transition through that technology and entrepreneurship lens. So we're an independent nonprofit, and while we do work very closely with the utility, which has an important role in what it means to be net zero and how we're getting to net zero, we also look broadly beyond just one utility or one region. And I think that brings up an important component that Brett was just asking about on what is net zero, how do we get there? And from our perspective, net zero is ultimately going to rely very heavily on electricity, right? Industry wants to decarbonize, and they're moving to electric arc furnaces to smelt steel, or they're moving to electric heaters to drive industrial chemical manufacturing processes or polymer processes that were previously done with natural gas. And to be able to electrify those means we also need to be able to provide the electrons for that. And so when we look at net zero and how we get there, there's an electrical component to it and there's a molecular component to it. And we have to really think through how those different carriers of energy really interplay with each other and will ultimately get us to, in some cases it's mobile energy, right? Where we just move it more around in a different form factor than on a power line. And in other cases, it's beefing up our power lines. But at the end of the day, it's figuring out a lot of net zero, I hate to say, is accounting, right? You need some very high level, very sophisticated accounting models to understand what carbon is being produced and where is it being offset and how do the economics run around that. So I think everyone's still figuring it out, right? But it's a very exciting space to have to play with all the numbers and play with all the systems, because it's where accounting and hardware and geography kind of all fit together is net zero.
Yeah. Yeah, Phil Diamond, nice to see a lot of you again. I'm with Nexa Capital Partners and E1 Air. So from the Nexa Capital Partners standpoint, I have an investment banking hat that I can put on here and talk about how net zero, how we interact with net zero when it comes up in our investment banking exercises from mostly a sell side M&A perspective. So a lot of investors oftentimes have green initiatives. They have goals that they'd like to meet within their portfolio. So I've got a lot of interactions and experience working with investors from that standpoint. And then from E1 Air's perspective, there's a lot of customers who you would think maybe aren't that interested in green initiatives and meeting their carbon neutral goals that end up being very interested in that. They're willing to pay a premium for a product that could potentially offer that. So it's we see it from both ends, from an investor and a customer perspective between the two different initiatives. So hopefully I can add something to this conversation. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you'll do much better than me. Hi, everybody. My name is Ken. Ken Davidian. I am retired, so I have zero. I should say I'm retired from most of my jobs. The one job I haven't fully retired from was my Virginia Tech job. So I should say my official affiliation with Virginia Tech these days. This is the first panel I've ever been on dealing with net zero, and I assume we're talking about carbon net zero. So I'm asking about that. But I'm an aerospace engineer, mechanical engineer by training from the Ohio State University in Case Western Reserve. You can tell I'm from the Northern Ohio region, worked for NASA Glenn for about 20 years, jump ship, resigned from the government, worked in private industry for about 4 years, and jumped back to NASA headquarters in DC, then worked for FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, ran a Center of Excellence for Commercial Space Transportation, and part of it, some of the research we did was on sustainability. But a lot of my personal experience, I think, is going to come into this. I think personally, outside of any airline travel, I think I'm net zero. I've got 5.5 kilowatt system on the photovoltaic system on my house. I drive an electric car. The only thing I don't have is the battery storage. And I think storage is going to be the next part of this discussion, because you see some prominent companies like Tesla just taking over the market. I've got an Enphase system for my photovoltaic system, but it's really interesting. Tesla just knows how to make the electric ecosystem as glamorous as possible. Charging your car is not a glamorous activity, but compared to any of the J1772 chargers out here, it's 100% glamorous. You can see doing it in a tuxedo. You grab the wand, you plug it into your car, it's done. And so I think it's gonna be an important aspect of it until the rest of the industry, like Enphase and stuff, catches up in terms of usability and user interface to the information. I think it's gonna be an interesting uphill battle. So we'll see what happens. I have no experience in context of the kind of discussion.
That's all right.
I appreciate
You can tell our pre-panel briefing was tight and solid and on point, so we're glad to have Ken. I'm an aerospace engineer, that's why you're on the panel.
No problem. No, I get it. And space-based solar power obviously is
Yeah.
part of this discussion, but a lot of people might think, oh my God, that's crazy talk and stuff, but I've got real friends that out there that would tell you this is ready to go tomorrow. Technically, it's ready to go. It's the political aspect, the social, the environmental, and
So I want to touch on the social point because that's where the intersection is. Cost. So what we have represented here, we could sit here all day and talk cool technology, whether you want to talk hydrogen, whether you want to talk SMRs or fusion. We could talk all day about that, but unless the dollars are there, and unless the market is ready to pay for it, it's just an academic exercise. And it's important to have the academic exercise to move this technology. So I'm gonna start out, Phil, with you, because it all comes down, and my question, and I want each of you to weigh in on what your perception and what you think the reality is. Are we balancing the benefit of cleaner energy solutions with the perceived or the real cost? So is the return, are people willing more now to pay for these cleaner solutions? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the technology was so prohibitively expensive that even though it sounded good, no one paid for it. So are more people paying for it? And are we seeing that balance come up to where people are willing to pay whatever premium it is to have cleaner energy? And if you have some examples or ideas, that's because I think that's the tension point that we all deal with. And as innovators, we try to bring these technologies to market, and, low TRL level technologies, are just going to be so dripping wet. They're going to be expensive and not ready for prime time. So Phil, I'm gonna start with you. What's the?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Brett. So, what we see is consumers are tough to adopt and be motivated towards moving to really green solutions. But what we are seeing are corporations that do have mandates. So if a board or some sort of mandate is set up within a corporation to move it towards more net zero or greener carbon offsets and footprints, we are seeing that actually can gain some traction and actually attract dollars for really on a balance sheet that they're willing to spend on new assets that are potentially more green. It's baby steps. Oftentimes they're not, just willing to completely turn over their existing equipment and turn it over into green equipment. But we're seeing from a corporation level, yes, and investment dollars. From an investor standpoint, green doesn't mean green money. It's oftentimes a lot of these green technologies are not necessarily profitable yet. The technology is not quite there for a lot of these technologies. But what you are seeing is that with government subsidies, oftentimes if the company is really focused on getting green and they're smart about it, they can turn a profit using different avenues of revenue in order to attract those investment dollars that otherwise they wouldn't necessarily be attracting.
And I'll touch on, especially with your field of study and technology. So hydrogen, when I talk to people about hydrogen, they're like, what do I do with it? And, the easiest conversation I've been able to have is, hey, think about hydrogen use in transportation. And just think about one application which you're working on. It can help. A hydrogen powered fuel cell vehicle can go further than just a battery powered vehicle. So think about replacing diesel fuel. Diesel fuel, we all know, is dirty, polluting, and so forth. So moving from diesel to hydrogen it will help your cars go further, and, you know, it will essentially extend the range of a battery. And so when you put a solution like hydrogen in terminologies that people are like, oh, I've got a battery powered vehicle, but it doesn't go very far, I have to keep recharging it. You know, now you can think about this new technology, which is a fuel source. It can, you know, help extend the range of your battery, or help batteries become smaller. So, you know, it's a complement as opposed to just this weird technology you have to understand. So,
Yeah, I'll chime in and say, I think, I think in energy world, all demand will follow cheap supply, right? I mean, you can look at kind of, I had a slide in my earlier presentation of kind of those energy transitions as we march down, right? What we're doing, industry, heavy industry, the bulk consumers, right? Like the average everyday consumer, right, is a couple megawatts, a few megawatts a year, and you know, has their car. And so if you want to get to real decarbonization, you have to look into heavy industry. You have to march down a heavy industry decarbonization route, and they're unwilling entirely to pay a premium for green anything, right? I mean, it's just the nature of the margins within which they live. There's no green premium on hydrogen being sold right now. There's no green premium on electricity outside of PPAs being sold. That's why your large data companies like Amazon and Microsoft are starting to build their own power plants, because they can actually do it cheaper than they can buy it from the power companies. And so if we really want to get to a net zero and march down the kind of carbon chain into a very clean, a CO2 free kind of economy, then we have to make the supply massively cheaper, right? I mean, all demand will follow cheap supply in energy. It's just the kind of the nature of it. It's why Virginia has been very competitive with data centers. We still have cheap electricity compared to many other states in this part of the world, particularly like the Northeast and even some southern ones. And so so demand will follow that supply. And so if we can figure out ways to really come in and make our hydrogen cost competitive, make our electricity cost competitive. The reason nuclear is not being built right now is it's not cost competitive because of the amount of regulation that has to go into it, right? And the amount of lawsuits, right? It doesn't matter what side, it doesn't matter what energy project you want to build right now. You're going to get sued left, right, and center. You're going to get sued by the conservatives. You're going to get sued by the liberals. You're going to get sued by everybody, because no one wants really projects to be done at this kind of stage of our kind of industrial societal development. And it makes it really hard to get these through the lines when you need more power lines to be able to have electric vehicles, but the community doesn't want that transmission line. How are you going to charge those electric vehicles, right? It's where you start seeing this idea of energy mobility, and everyone's, you look at any energy developer and project right now, it's you'll hear one of two words: modular or mobile. And a lot of the times you'll hear them in the same breath. It's modular and mobile, right? We can daisy chain these together. We're gonna have a lower footprint. The idea that it's movable, right, means that we don't have to go through the siting and the same siting and zoning permitting process. And so you're trying to adapt it. You're trying to adapt a whole scale societal redesign around these energy sources that you're never going to make either side happy. And it makes it rather difficult. But I think you start seeing glimpses of it, right? You start seeing people under communities, really like very local communities, recognizing that there's jobs to be had in these developments, that they are safe, right? And that there is export potential, right? There's an opportunity for job transition and workforce transition as you look towards the kind of net zero movement of everything. You know, instead of taking, you know, your typical gas truck, right, driver, now they're going to be delivering methanol, or they're going to be delivering hydrogen. It's just a matter of that kind of time to get people there, which is such a big component of any transition. Is back to that time, right? That time and cost component. And so you're just always trying to maneuver through all these different tensions that are happening.
So, and you're actually gonna get the curveball question,
Okay, great.
but you have, I'll let you follow up on.
Again, from my perspective, you know, this seems like a I don't know how standard, but innovation adoption, diffusion of innovation sort of question and of high technology. And I think an important point was brought up. One of the worst ways to force an industry to grow and stuff is through coercion or through mandates, government mandates. Thou shalt do this, right? In an ideal world, industry would come up with their own voluntary consensus standards, and they would, agree to do stuff, on their own without being forced to do it. They want them to cooperate. And obviously for electric vehicles, they've gone to mandates and demand has gone up because hey, $7,500 off the gas price, and that's the federal rebate. There are state and their local rebates you can take advantage of. When I got my PV system put in, I had federal rebate, I had DC rebate, which is super generous. So it cut my cost by 75%. My break even was 3 years into my thing. I'm 15 years, I'm 14, 15 years in my system. And so, I've been pumping back in. But so obviously some consumers are doing it, but as Christensen says, it starts at the high end and it starts working down, you work through the functionality, reliability, customer convenience and cost bases of demand. And so obviously first it's going to be adopted by people who absolutely have to have this, if they're mandated to have that, to invest in energy. They do that. The major corporations are hedging their bets. That, as you mentioned, they're investing both in the renewable as well as the traditional sources of energy. So they're just playing a game. They're diversifying their portfolio. They're not necessarily really committed to it, right? They're committed to, they'll say they stockholders, but really it's just a profit. So, again, these are just general statements that are almost true in a lot of the innovation and adoption kind of things. So we're going to start with mandates. We're going to start with high end. It's going to work its way down based on availability. Everybody's adopted the North American charging standard now. So there was the de facto standard that came into place. Perfect. That's better than the government telling people to do it, right? And so it seems like we're just playing this out. I was telling folks in an earlier panel that I'm reading this book that talked about the evolution and the adoption and diffusion of the home heating stove and cooking stove. And, again, when you look at the political, economic, technological, environmental, Mother Nature, as well as societal kind of factors that reach in, there are a lot of things that influence the emergence of that industry that were not technical, that were not economic, and it was the societal norms. And, now we're thinking a lot more about the environmental impact as well as the social impacts. And these are all going to have major impacts on the diffusion. So there's a hodgepodge of thoughts there, but it kind of comes back to this is just a part of the natural evolution. And part of it is marketing, but part of it is the economics and technical and political all mixed in. And like you said, you're going to get sued from both sides. Everybody thinks it's a terrible idea because if it's different, it's wrong. And it's different. So, yeah.
All right, here's the,
Sorry.
no, that's great. And I think you're right. So we're in a room, if you're coming to this thing, you're probably an early adopter. I think it's safe to say a high percentage of people here and throughout, in the park, in Blacksburg, early adopters, very passionate about, either new technology or sustainability or moving this way. How do you have the conversation with someone that is just trying to make it through the day, trying to go month to month, paycheck to paycheck? They're just happy that gas has come down off of, $4 down to maybe $3.15, and it's a little bit of relief at the pump. They're not even thinking about sustainability. They're driving a 15-year-old Toyota Camry that gets decent gas mileage. They're just trying to make it back and forth to their job. What do you say to those people about the importance of this issue and how should they be thinking about it? And this just gets to communication, awareness, and just adoption, the meat of the market. We're going to saturate the early adopters. Can we make it over the chasm and touch those people in a meaningful way?
I'll take that first. I think you can. Sounds like it's a marketing issue to me. Because the problem are people that are not able to adopt it because they've got more pressing real world economic issues to deal with. That's the lens they're going to be looking at this problem, this solution through. And it's going to be really hard for them to justify making that change. Getting rid of that, maintaining a 15-year-old car is a lot cheaper than going out and buying a new one, to a certain point. And so they're just going to, the infrastructure's there, they're not going to want to make that change. If you gave them, or if you took the tariffs off the Chinese cars, brought in the BYDs that are super subsidized, they would buy it. Some of those BYDs are under $10,000, right, in China. So, give them a $10,000 card that's electric and tell them, hey, listen, we have a nuclear reactor that's only 93 million miles away. You know, that will give you free power. Free. I mean, and you could talk them into it, I think, but you know, right now we look like aliens saying this. Like folks from outer space saying that because it's so divested from reality. So is there a way to make them adopt this? Just might take time, I don't think, again, besides giving them the alternative, I don't think.
Yeah.
Well, it's marketing.
Yeah, I don't know that the technology is quite ready to approach the consumer like that. I think that you have to sort of put the responsibility on industry to refine the technology so that they can have a successful business case, and maybe not now, but maybe 5 years down the road, a sort of work plan that they can get to so that they can have a product that they can offer that consumer that is maybe competitive or cheaper than what they're currently doing. I don't know that you can really reliably rely on the consumer when, I mean, especially right now with inflation and just the problems that people are experiencing. I don't know that you put that on them. I think you put it on industry to refine their technologies and offer a better product that's cleaner and cheaper.
All right, I say Ken opened the door, so I gotta direct this question to Braden. This is another curveball. Ken opened the door for the sun. Our nuclear reactor that's 93 million miles away is based on fusion technology, not fission. Yeah, so I'm gonna throw this to Braden. Is there a true breakthrough technology that could significantly change the game here? Because we are talking about, in my opinion, you know, there's been a lot of technology development. I wouldn't call it incremental, but yeah, I mean, there's infrastructure requirements. But, you know, there have been in the history of human evolution, you know, technologies have come along that have been so dramatically disruptive that they've changed the course of mankind. I mean, just think about fire for a minute. Fire is one of our earliest and still to this day, probably our best invention. And so is there something out there on the horizon that could potentially give us that level of disruption?
Yeah, well,
I like that. I mean, you know, like I gotta put him, he's my best buddy.
are you
I
saying
gotta, like-
fusion, right? So I mean, like, right, I think there's a lot of talk on both fusion and fission as, right? I mean, the United States largest, carbon-free generation method is our nuclear power plants. And we took the eye off the ball, and we've fallen behind in terms of construction of those. Now our portfolio is still, our fleet is still the largest in the world, but China right now has 20 to 30 reactors under development. Korea is selling reactors left and right to the Middle East, and the UAE just brought in record time and in record budget 4 reactors online with Korean technology that's just astronomically safe. And so I think a lot of the issue in the energy world right now is electricity is not new, right? We had that spark a century and more ago. It's just now we're trying to figure out how do we produce it in the quantities that we need without all the externalities around it. And I think that's where these big maybe aha moments or technologies get to, right? When we can move more power around that's produced cleanly to power our everyday, takes a lot of effort. And unfortunately, a lot of those efforts are stalled because there are these competing tensions, right? You have communities like Charlottesville that are trying to ban new natural gas hookups, right? At the time you have people, record natural gas output from Appalachia and other basins in the United States. And so we become a net energy exporter. We have everyone thinks Gen 4 nuclear reactors were all just invented and they're all new. They're based on technology that the DOE funded in the 1950s and 1960s, right? They're just being adapted with modern sensors, modern materials and concrete and new types of steel and new types of pressure fittings and valves to make them safer. right? But we've held on to this societal, kind of perception of a very unsafe, right? Type of power production, and fusion is going to be the same way. I mean, there's going to be a set of citizens that don't believe that the very low level of radiation that comes off of a fusion reactor should be anywhere near a society, right? Or near a community. And that's gonna make it relatively hard, right? Hydrogen right now has the same, a lot of community pushback on the explosivity of it and kind of the exclusion zones that you need, even though these have all been solved and all been regulated for, and they're not new to any of our safety boards or any of the safety institutions. I think the biggest spark that has to happen is a community conversation, right? I think that's where a lot of this is being held back. And there's the cost component to it too. I mean, if we really think about the level of wealth within which even the lowest income would need that $10,000 car, their life is still lived better than the vast majority of any other person in human history. They have access to more electricity and more power. They have more mobility. They have more information and communication. We don't all feel like that in our day-to-day lives necessarily, right? But look around, look at the wealth that's just in every part of the community. I mean, the TVs are cheap. I remember the first, right across the airport where I grew up, right? Like I had one of those old, like original Gateway computers, right? That you put the floppy disk in, and just think about where we've come in 20, 25 years. And if that continues, we're on the back half of this chessboard, and things are just going to exponentially decay in cost for sustainable, for the sustainability and ultimately a wealth type of endeavor. But it's the conversation around this, so we don't all get sued by every direction, right? Like we still have to get things done. Like projects have to happen, and whether they happen in the United States or probably more likely, you might see some developing countries kick these things off, sooner than the United States kicks them off.
I think, my thought on that last point is exactly right. I mean, some of the developing countries, back when cell phone towers started becoming ubiquitous and cell phones became reliable, there were a lot of developing companies that never put telecommunications infrastructure, wired phone lines in their countries. I mean, there are countries that, in developing third world or even Eastern Bloc companies that are rebuilding themselves, they just invested totally in cell technology. And so you can see how certain adaptations. All right, I'm going to open it up for Q&A. You thought my questions were hard? These guys are going to be brutal. So we want your hardest questions thrown at this group. Very, very smart. What are the thoughts? What are your thoughts as we kind of kick this idea around? I mean, this is a huge global issue. No question, too big, too small. Love to hear what your questions, concerns, or thoughts are. Anyone here? Who here owns an EV?
I'm the only one. Oh my God.
Wow. No one here.
I'm the only one. Okay, we got
Who here has installed some kind of clean power solution at their house? Okay, Roger, we knew that. And Andy, okay, we got some early documents. What was that, Elliot?
I wrote my bike today.
All right, Elliot's the original clean energy solution.
Human power. Human power.
Yeah.
Depending on what he ate, it's clean. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, back here.
So, yeah, I've got a question about just you talk about the marketing side of things to get people willing to adapt. So, I'm under 30, full disclosure, and I just think I think there's a lot to be done on the children's side of things too, because children today are growing up with cool electric cars. They're seeing oil spills, they're seeing carbon pollution bad. And so what more do you think we can do to kind of convince the upcoming generation to pursue cleaner energy, to pursue net zero, and to shoot for that? And how many generations do you think it's going to take? Because cigarettes are still slowly getting phased out, vapes are getting phased in, but that's beside the point. And it's kind of this generational thing that if you grow up being told this is the next thing, but eventually that becomes reality. So what more do you think we done with this?
Like overland supersonic flight, I would say, talk to your friends and get them not to oppose nuclear energy just because they're dead. The hard water or the heavy water reactors way back when, We're supplanted by the light water reactors, which we weren't building really as much as the people that are getting new, using the new technology. So people are really afraid, especially the 60 and older crowd. They're going, holy cow, nuclear reactor bad, 3 Mile Island, right? I watched the Chernobyl series. I know what the hell's going on. So its thing is, they are designing them now to incredible levels of safety, cost money. But it can be done and it has to be done because we're not gonna get out of not gonna pull ourselves to net zero just with solar, right? Or wind. Waves, who knows, but nuclear is established and it can be safe. Getting rid of the waste is one of the big deals from traditional reactors. What's his name? Bill Gates, right? What's in
TerraPower.
TerraPower is working on a different kind of thing where they burn the waste in a controlled way underground. And so they're just, right, they're starting construction on a mega site for that type of nuclear power. So looking at innovations, looking at socially, it's a social problem. In that sense, technology's been waiting, and by the way, fusion TRL, 4, 5, maybe 6 right now, so it's got a way to go. I was gonna mention Gerhard Mensch too, from the 1970s, stalemate technology. It takes 100 years for a government-sponsored research program or invention to turn into innovation, to turn into products typically, so.
All right, I have an answer for you. That's not gonna take 100 years.
Sorry.
So right across the street here at building 1600, College of Engineering at Virginia Tech. One of my favorite programs in the mechanical engineering department is a program called Bolt. And Bolt is an initiative to take a motorcycle from Yamaha, a gas-powered motorcycle, and convert it to a battery electric vehicle. And the whole concept of that is to help educate students and young minds who are interested in, what does this even look like? And so to take all the machinery and mechanism of an internal combustion engine and actually strip all that out, put in a battery and a motor and help people understand this is actually, this is doable and simpler and, you still get that experience. So
From a technological point of view, I would say that's the stupidest way to design a vehicle. From a social adoption point of view, I would say that's the smartest way to design a vehicle. Anyway.
I think, yeah, I think, I don't think you have to convince any Gen Alpha or eventually have to convince Gen Alpha or convince Gen Z that sustainability should be at the forefront of the mind. They've been bombarded with that from the day that they were born. What I think you have to convince them is that the things that have given them the lives that they have grown up knowing with the material wealth that they have had require chemicals and require oil and require carbon, right? The nature of it is you can't have a single thing in this room without oil, right? You can't point to anything in here. And I don't mean oil to make gasoline to move a car. I mean, fundamentally to get the materials and the chemicals to make our synthetics, right? And so we have to really be intentional about what materials are we going to build with in the future? And are those materials single-use materials, or is there a life cycle component that has to be given, taken into account like Europe has, right? With the end producer responsibility of having to take back every single product. When you send a product out of your factory, you have to have a plan for receiving that product back to your factory to do something with, right? And so the United States is far from a leader in any of this sustainability world, right? Because we come at it from a market-driven material wealth perspective. And so I think maybe a component is really redefining what consumption is with a quality over a quantity, but that's going to be really hard societally to tell people. And so we have to start really thinking about what chemicals and what materials and what processes are going into the products that we have. And then empowering those next generations to want to tackle those problems, right? And giving them the agency to go tackle those problems themselves. With us kind of stepping out of the way and saying, we've done what I think we've lost a lot in this sustainability debate is that we've done the best that we can do that we had at the time that we could do it, right? And the recognition of we didn't just wake up one day and all of a sudden have coal, right? We didn't just wake up one day and have nuclear. It took the best and the brightest minds at the time to come up with these these systems, these materials and these energy flows. And now we just need better and brighter minds, and we can leverage technology to augment some of our human capabilities to look at what that is in the future and how do we recycle these back in and how do we break down polymers back into what they're doing. And we're seeing it now. We're seeing it with the solar panels that are coming offline. We're seeing it with the windmills that are coming offline and each have reached the end of their life. And that's one of the big debates around sustainable energy, renewable energy, is a nuclear power plant will give you 80 years very reliably. It'll give you even more than that very reliably, but the government kind of stops it there for the time being. A solar farm gives you 20, right? And then legally, you have to restore that land back to its original state when you took it over, right? So it's not like you can just keep bolting solar panels on there, right? And windmills are massive amounts of epoxy and composite fibers and all these other things that just are getting landfilled. And so I think the biggest challenges are with all the material wealth that we have, how do we keep that and actually reuse that, right? So it's like, when I think about recycling and kind of sustainability and circularity, it's like reduce, reuse, recycle, and we have to reinvent everything, right? We've done the best that we can, and we're all going to keep doing that. I mean, I think it's generation infinity is we're always going to have problems, right? And it's just giving people the power and the agency and the education and the resources to go solve those with everyone else is what will be that, what is that frontier for my kids, right? My 5-year-old and my 3-year-olds and then their kids and their kids. I mean, I was talking with some friends the other day and this blew my mind. I was thinking about this. I was like, I'm probably going to die as like a great, if not great grandfather, right? Like it's like our ages keep creeping up. And so we just have more stuff, right? Like and more people and
That's a
more
nightmare.
things.
That's a nightmare.
That's a lot of colleges I have to fund. And so I think we just got to get after it in a lot of regards, right? And do the best that we can.
Wow, you didn't think you'd hear about generation, 3 or 4 generations out, so, we're so thankful for this panel. Lightning round for a minute. Anyone here have a startup or working on a venture, that's in the sustainability field?
Yeah.
John? Give us your pitch. What are you working on? Tell the group.
Private tech company, we have a selective air capture technology. Full fleet that harvest it and reuse it, put it back in the supply chain. So our first 2 applications are in agriculture, so you can say we're sustainable ag tech also. But capturing CO2 from direct air capture, putting it in indoor grow, vertical farms, greenhouses, or heavy users of CO2. They bring tanker trucks of CO2 in, and we can replace that CO2 with the sustainable supply of CO2 we pull from the air. And they don't have to get these big, expensive tanker trucks anymore. And the other area in ag we're working on is ammonia capture in poultry houses.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, ag tech is a big field where a lot of these technologies are being applied. We talked a lot about cars and nuclear energy and electricity, but those applications are really important. If you want to hear more about MOVA, this is another shameless plug. So the reception tomorrow night at Eastern Divide, MOVA is going to be highlighted and celebrated. So make sure everybody comes out for a free beer. Compliments of our Game Changer fans and get to know MOVA a little bit more. They're a local company really getting it done. Elliot, did you have a question?
I had one for the panel earlier, but your question about startups and whether or not you're in sustainability. So Skypost does micro 3D printing, but
Yeah.
the process we're replacing is based on semiconductor technology. So a lot of the micro devices for lab on chip, microfluidics have been done in clean rooms, which require massive amounts of energy, really, really bad chemicals, really large spaces. And so the micro 3D printing stations are self-contained, use a lot less power, don't use any of the HF acids and things like that. So I'd say we're not necessarily targeting sustainability, but we are in the system.
I think it's a really super interesting point because that's the other kind of thing that you see us marching down is like the size of things. Like we can fit more and more power, more and more chemicals, more and more processes in smaller spaces, which naturally lends itself to more open space, more, kind of elbow room and beautiful vistas that everyone, I think as a society, as a country, we've really defined as being very important to the American dream is having a view shed and having that clean air. And so the more efficient and the smaller that we can make anything, and I think this to the nuclear discussion, this is one of the big debates is that land use, right? A solar farm, right? Your megawatt is, you know, a megawatt of solar is somewhere in the 7 to 9 acres, depending on what type of panel you're using right now. So you need 7 to 9 acres per megawatt, where nuclear for 300 megawatts, you need 50 acres, right? So you start recognizing there's a massive energy density delta there in terms of what you're able to produce, and then over the lifetime of that productive air.
They're looking at vertical solar orientations
Sure.
and stuff, so that would get rid of that.
Yeah.
kind of acreage requirement, because we're
Yeah.
not putting them on, my panels are like maybe at 10 degrees, and they should be at 40 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because of zoning. So there's a lot of political things that go into the equation as well as societal. I was gonna say, to plug space for clean energy, space-based solar power is one of the primary sources where you just use a bunch of big solar arrays and beam it down. The problem is the power beaming part. Number one, it's got easily imaginable terrestrial utilization, beaming power from point A to point B with no wires. Part of the problem is a political one, in that if we started taking power from space and beaming it down to basically a bunch of chain link fences that are the collectors, it looks like a weapon. I mean, it looks like a lot of countries would say, you're doing what? I mean, that's a lot of power.
A lot of power.
That's a
I think most of those are microwave.
yeah, right, that's right.
Now,
And so this is a weapon you're talking about. And at least could be perceived as a weapon. So there's this huge political resistance to implementing something which is technologically doing. It's been shown on Earth. They've done power
Yeah.
beaming on Earth.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the best energy technologies coming out of NASA with nuclear propulsion systems and
High
I
density
mean,
power.
exactly. I mean, we have to
batteries
think
and stuff,
about,
right?
you know, it's very expensive to get power to the moon and then from the moon to Mars. And so I think that's a really interesting kind of place to watch for the technology. I mean, bulk hydrogen systems designed and originated with NASA, right? I mean, and still are with the Space Launch System, and Blue Origin has adopted, you know, is going the hydrogen route versus the methane route that SpaceX is going. And so you have these competing technologies, but yeah, the space energy is super interesting.
And I think the other place that these breakthroughs come out of are the small labs. So
Mhm.
Brett, thank you for really putting all this together and hosting a lot of these labs here, because I think what we see a lot of small companies that come through looking for funding. Oftentimes it's a little too early, or it's not a great fit from a management perspective. But we like to sort of educate and coach these smaller companies up, because they have great technologies that could really change really the way we live. I've seen so many things that I'm NDA'd and I can't tell you guys about, but really amazing things. I could say I've seen battery densities that are pretty crazy.
Nice.
And you know, they're not perfect technologies, but they can be refined potentially, and oftentimes it's small labs. It's guys and girls with great ideas.
That's the whole point of this week too. We're just trying to open up this to the whole community.
Yeah.
I think, Tom, did you have a question, Tom?
Yeah, well, maybe a statement, we're talking about mobility and smaller footprint and distributed energy sources. One of the common drivers that maybe everybody can get on board with, unfortunately, might be security. You know, our power grid is pretty open to being disrupted right now. You know, you knock out GPS, you knock out electricity, you knock out whatever, and you're stalled, right? So distributing that makes it harder to take out. And that's almost something that seems like everybody can get behind and say, yeah, it really is a good thing that we should do.
You've mentioned something that, I don't know if it was apples and oranges in your statement, but I mean, the GPS versus the electric grid, one's in space, obviously, one's on Earth. The problem with the space part is, and the Air Force will come in, NASA will tell you this too, a day without satellites is a terrible day. You need the GPS for PNT, position, navigation, timing. It's involved with all your financial transactions, blah, blah, blah. It's fantastic. But as you just pointed out, it's a single point failure. It does not take a genius to be able to say, I'll do an ASAT, test, and I'll just make a given orbit uninhabitable for the rest of I mean, let's face it, we're doing net zero. Why? Not to save the planet, it's to save us. The planet's gonna be fine. The planet's gone through a whole bunch of changes. Humanity is what we're worried about. So you could take out a bunch of different orbits that'll be taken out for the rest of our existence. And so to me, space could be perceived as a single point failure. So we need to be figuring out how to replicate those functions here on Earth. Because at some point, someday, there will be a crazy enough person from our country or someone else that destroys space for everybody. The tragedy of the commons is a possible future.
Yeah, I'd plus one that net zero is not about the planet,
No,
right?
it's not.
It is purely about humans.
Oh, the
Like,
planet's
it
fine. The planet's
is-
fine.
It is not about.
It's gone through
We are
climate change a
not
lot.
going to destroy.
It's not.
life.
The planet. Planet
But
will
we
be
will destroy human life.
That's right.
And I think that's
So it's
always,
not our comfort.
I think that's an important, obstacle actually in the whole adoption of net zero is the emotion, what we've tied net zero up in, right? Which is like the benefit and health of the planet, right? When you make such an abstract statement, so emotional, right? We kind of lose sight of what we're trying to do, which is provide clean air, clean water, and clean landscapes for humans to enjoy, not for deer and squirrels and bear.
That's
and-
right. And it's gotta be equitable. I mean, you look at the GDPs related to energy consumption and they're correlated, right? You know, the more energy that a country uses, the more GDP they have.
Yep.
And so, you know, in Southern Africa, you know, and in different parts of the Sahara or going into, so I went to school in Cape Town, so I was looking at
Okay.
Africa at that time. And yeah, there's these Namibia, you know, Zimbabwe, whatever, these countries that have, you know, they're struggling to grow because they don't have the electrical connection that they need.
And I think that's why we're gonna leapfrog. I think those countries
Yeah, just-
will end up leapfrogging, figuring out now. We have real political systems and there are security concerns around proliferation in some of these countries. But that's where you see a lot of these Gen 4 micro reactors come in where they're entirely tamper proof, or the fissile material that they use has no plutonium decay into them, right? And so you know, outside of Chernobyl, which had the destruction that it had, the second highest death rate from and depending on how you look at Fukushima, so either the second or third largest death rate from a radiation exposure was actually in Brazil from a medical isotope canister in an MRI machine that
Oh,
was
wow.
pried open and passed around the community because it was glowing and they didn't know what it was. And these looters, I joke you not, you can look this up. These looters, there was an MRI medical facility that was abandoned. There was a fight between the owners and the investors and they left it. And then eventually it was looted and they pried apart the MRI machine to get all the magnets and the metals and the canister of whatever the isotope was that was in there. And they couldn't, you know, they were trying to, you know, finally pried it open, the thing's glowing in it. People were tasting it, people were passing 100,000 people.
Madam Curie. said-
100,000 people were dosed and then 6 people died directly from the radiation. But that's a medical issue, right? But that always gets lumped into our power plant discussion. And those are very different.
Yeah.
And infusion right now is on track to be regulated as the same way that like our medical imaging devices are regulated versus the way that our nuclear fission power plants are regulated because of the derivatives that are the isotopes that are made there. So I think we're eventually in this state, just to prepare y'all, there's eventually going to be a public discussion about who should regulate fusion. Should it be the Department of Health, the Virginia Department of Health, which is right now the regulator of non-uranium based radioactive material through our agreement status with the NRC? Or should it be the Virginia Department of Energy, or should it be a third entity? And so we're eventually we're very near term having to grapple with a new regulatory regime around an energy source that can produce large amounts of carbon-free electricity with very minimal, there is still waste, right? But it's very minimal waste, depends on what your fuel source is. But it's not the same type of waste that we have in our fission reactors. And so it's just you know, it's these types of community discussions and public discussions, which ultimately inform where they get implemented, how they get implemented, and what we do with that, ultimately where the market opportunity is. This is a call to everyone. Like there's tons of money to be made in all of this space, right? And but that's kind of what drives its adoption.
Did y'all think we'd be getting into all this? This is all over the place. Other questions, other thoughts,
My fault.
comments?
It's all my
We-
fault.
that's all right. We welcome this. I mean, we're all, but it's all important topics. I mean, you can just see how interconnected this is.
I'll jump again. I'm wondering where the discussion happens about reduction of energy dependence. We've talked about, we've got nuclear, you've got wind, you've got solar, you've got these other sustainable targets and tangents. But we don't really talk about like something for normal households where 20 to 40% of the energy maybe is for HVAC and general heating and cooling. It can be used also for water heating, not to your full temperature for your bath water, but it can get you close there. The solar energy that can come down to reduce the temperature on solar panels can be used to preheat water to go into your. How come that's not part of a lot of this discussion?
Bill, you want to take that?
Well, it sounds like that would fall on the consumer's wallet, which goes back to that question that you asked, Brett. And at the end of the day, I think everybody's hesitant to make the average person's water bill or electrical bill greater. When they won't see a benefit, they'll just see sort of less of a benefit. It's a detraction. So, for example, like you said, if they can no longer use their water heater to its maximum capacity, but they have to reroute water up to the solar panels, there are more points of failure potentially for the water plumbing. That would fall onto the consumer as well. So it's just more complex. And so if there is a breakthrough that comes out that's easier, but it accomplishes the same goal, I think then you could potentially move that into the house and into the consumer. But
Give you one.
More about, so there's a company in New York, I think it's called Sunflower, and they will geothermal heat your house because the 2.5 feet or so below the earth stays relatively 55 degrees. But it used to be really expensive to plow a whole field to lay down all of that piping so that you could have enough of a large, vast area to be able to pull from, either heat or cool your house to that 55 degrees. But when you get one of these geothermals installed, your energy usage for your HVAC system drops from about $100 a month to about $15, because all you're doing is running fans basically, and then changing that temperature differential by 20 degrees, not by as much as we do. But that can also be routed to other areas of the home. And so I'm wondering is, we always talk about, hey, we've got to use solar, we got to use wind, we got to use nuclear, and we're throwing up the hurdles against each one of those individually, but we're not looking at a complete holistic ecosystem.
I think you have to, the average consumer doesn't do a good job of distinguishing CapEx and OpEx and where they saving that money or spending that money, right? So the upfront cost, right? If I can buy my standard heat pump or my standard HVAC or my window unit, right? Versus having to do this geothermal, right? Over the lifetime, right? So I think there is a consumer education component there, but I think there's technologies on the horizon that will continue to bring those costs down. I mean, we've hit heat pumps, right? They're really getting adopted. We've been supporting a set of entrepreneurs, very early stage. They're not even sure they want to be entrepreneurs yet, but at a VCU, that are working on magnetocaloric refrigeration. So instead of using our gas compression expansion cycles to refrigerate, they're working on the utilization of magnets in specific types of material that actually, when you run that magnetic field on off on these materials, they actually do a highly efficient cooling job, right? So you can save 30 to 40% of your costs there, right? And so energy efficiency for all the utilities, energy efficiency is a huge component. If you read APCO's integrated resource plan, actually one of the big ways that they plan to meet their mandate under the VCEA is their energy efficiency programs, right? So getting people to just use less electricity by upgrading their HVAC or insulating their buildings. I mean, the United States just has massive technical deficit. What is that?
That's basically what I'm talking about. If you're upgrading your HVAC,
Right.
it requires a regulatory body that to come in and say, well, you can't use this anymore. You can't use the standard HVAC. You're gonna have to use something else. We've done it before with R22 when we phased that out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can totally do that with geothermal, or, percentage
Sure.
of new HVAC systems must be a geothermal. And so, the comment was made before that we can't do it by regulating, and that's the worst way to do it. And I agree in general, except that some of that needs to be government led, because it needs to be government mandated, whether it's on federal facilities or new construction going up, where we're gonna have more efficient, LEED certified buildings that rely on like over at the other end of the CRC here, rely on the pond to do part of their HVAC system.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a carrot or a stick, right? I mean, I think the nature of American citizens is we do not like being told what to do, right? And so industry, you can get away with a bit of that stick, right? But I think through our tax incentives, through the IRA, through other programs, we're trying to put it out there more as a carrot, right? Of get the tax incentive back for you versus a stick of you have to do it this way. Now, the way you do it is you have to do it this way is you put it into the building codes. But the building codes are adopted at a micro, community level, right? So I don't know, Blacksburg's probably on 2016, right? NFPA 2016 or whatever it is. Every community can choose what version of the building code that they want to be on and they want to regulate to, right? And so if you want to move a community, and you get into a lot of really hairy political states' rights, community rights, federal rights, right? I mean, it's a big can of worms.
And that's the political perspective. The social perspective, and again, going back to my stove adoption example, it was after World War II where electric stoves really took off because the government started building all this low-cost housing. And they put it in there. So now people, took what they got. It was more efficient. It's not something that people wanted to buy because they were into their natural gas stoves and all this sort of stuff. But the government sort of took it on because they knew long-term was lower operating cost. And so that was another way that it became part of a society's sort of normal way of behaving, but not because they chose it, but because they were given it. So I don't know if that's it.
All right, we're gonna end it here, but these guys are around. We'd love to like huddle up. I think there's still cookies or refreshments, either snacks here or downstairs. Take over this building. This is your spot. Let's continue the conversation.
I do want to say that the Bolt team that you mentioned is
Yeah.
going to be here on Thursday
Yeah, sure.
showcasing. So if you want to see what Bolt is doing, they'll be here.
All right, thanks. Please come back. That's at the airport, right?
No, they're going to be here at the
Sure.
CRC showcase.
Okay, see, I don't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all for coming. Enjoy the week. We're just kicking off, so this is a warm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry for talking so much.
I apologize. Thanks, Brad. Hey, Gentlemen.
Yeah. Guys, we have to give you for you. Here's some blue bags on your mail. Thank you. It's my little bag over here.
So great. I'm so glad. I enjoyed learning about all of this stuff. I was like, there's one of my classes. Different things. But one of the things that we're seeing a lot is my sister.
Oh, yes.
They have a lot of problems. Well, they also has to, it also has to do a lot right now. You have the best thing doing this. I worked with a lot of people from Just put them in the room. And, one of the guys, I don't remember.
I just started last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't.
They have started.
I'll give you a little.
Okay. All of that. Yes, that's good.
Yeah, no, he is a best.
And, police talking.
Such a. It's either bombarded by radiowaves all the time.
I mean, that's gonna be huge for the market. Well, it's gonna allow.
Yeah.
Just like looking and I'm like.
Yeah.
So they got an 80.
Yeah.
It can't.
They show up.
Thanks for having me.
I said, oh my God, you've got.
Thanks for stopping by.
Hey, Laura. Construction technologies and then I could.
I got a observation.
So,
I think everyone signed out. But here, before you do that, let me say, is there a way to lock the owl on a forward view? Because I noticed when I was sitting